Hey everyone, welcome to the Kentico Rocks podcast, the podcast about all things Kentico content, Kentico Xperience, .NET, and Azure. This is your host, Brian McKeiver, and we are on episode number 33. I'm excited today because I have a special guest with me, Sean Wright. So it's actually your second time on the podcast. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, good to see you.
Thank you. And actually, it's pretty cool. This time we can see each other. Last time, I'm not sure if we could or not. I've upgraded the equipment a little bit here, and even though I've battled some technical issues to get started today, I couldn't be more excited because we have a great topic, right? We're going to talk about one of the things that has just happened in the Kentico community, which is the launch of the Kentico 13 third beta, or Phoenix Milestone 3, if those of you following along at home. And the killer feature of that is there is even more information out there about the .NET Core story with Phoenix Beta 3 and where Xperience is going. But for those of you who don't know, Sean is one of my fellow Kentico MVPs. I've known him for great. But go ahead, Sean, introduce yourself to the listeners.
Yeah, thanks. My name's Sean Wright. I work for a small digital agency called WiredVeiews. We're based in Northeast Ohio. Been doing Kentico for several years now. Been a .NET developer for a bit longer than that. And I'm excited about all the new stuff coming up in Kentico, especially with this third beta.
Yeah, and I even heard it's even kind of nice in Ohio today, right? Same with Michigan. It's almost 80 degrees and sunny.
Yep.
That's awesome. Yep. Okay, so we're here to talk about Kentico Xperience 13 Beta 3 and what it means for .NET Core, because actually this idea for this episode spawned from a conversation we were having with the Kentico development community around, what does it mean to use .NET Core if you're not used to it, especially in the Kentico world? Because there's two things going on there, right? There's the jump of understanding if you're only an MVC5 developer, how do I see the new benefits and use them in .NET Core MVC or Core MVC or ASP.NET Core MVC, whatever they want to call it these days. It seems like that name continues to evolve as we get to .NET 5, but that's a whole different story. That's one part of it. The second part is the fact that if you're coming from Kentico WebForms or Portal Engine, there's a lot of choices. There's a lot of different things, and we had this question asked of us of like, well, wait a minute, how do we actually upgrade our Kentico 12 MVC site to Kentico 13, or how do I start in Kentico 13 with MVC 5? And that was like a big red flag, right, Sean? It was like, wait, no way should you do that last thing.
Yeah, definitely. Just to be clear, Kentico does make it possible for us to upgrade our Kentico 12 MVC applications to Kentico Xperience 13 with MVC 5, staying on .NET full framework. So there'll be a handful of maybe API changes, mostly with page builder and some enhanced functionality. But it's not like a huge breaking change. It would be comparable to a Portal Engine upgrade from, say, 8 to 9 or 9 to 10. Mm-hmm. That is possible. But, yeah, both you and I agree that it's probably not the best option for most teams.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, to me it was immediate, like, cringe when I read that text. I'm like, oh, wait, no, you're thinking of it wrong, guys. What we want to think about is Kentico 13 with Xperience allows us this brand new format of developing, and it's really more modern application developing in modern .NET. So if you can, the best choice is to start from the ground up using .NET Core with a brand new .NET Core project, right? That is the best possible thing for you to do, because you're future-proofing for the next multiple of years using the best .NET platform that it has to offer because of many reasons. And we'll get into some of the benefits of .NET Core if you're not familiar with them. But, I think actually the installer makes it nice. So it looks like we've got a guest in the background there, Sean. That's fine. Why don't we start with that? So I'm going to pop open the Kentico 13 Beta 3 installer and move around a little bit so that you can actually see it. And I got to use the right screen to do that. But if we get to the installer, and then we've all done this, right? We clicked a few starting steps. There was a quick installation MVC choice added a while ago. I mean, like Kentico 11, I think, was when they actually added that quick install. But if you actually just do custom installation, the first screen has now changed, and you're defaulted to ASP.NET MVC 5, which makes sense because that's what most of the people in the Kentico world have been working with in the last few years. But what we're saying is use this new choice of ASP.NET Core. And I
Yeah.
think, Sean, could you add maybe like what do you think are the benefits of using .NET Core compared to MVC5?
Yeah. So if you are starting that brand new Kentico 13 experience application, you don't have any, baggage from previous apps. You don't have anything that you need to manage in terms of that upgrade. So you get to start, that dream greenfield project that we always wish we had every time we're working on some code.
Always.
With that, you're going to get all sorts of things. So at the ground level, you get .NET Core, which means you get cross-platform. Your team members can do their development on their MacBooks. They can deploy to Linux environments. You can continue running on Windows if you want to. On top of that, you get a huge performance improvement because the .NET Core runtime has been rebuilt from the ground up. Right. Even though a lot of APIs stay the same, like file access and IEnumerable and link and all these things we're used to, all those still are the same, but the core platform that it's running on has had tons of performance improvements. It's a much smaller framework in terms of the weight, and you get those benefits for free when you choose that second option in the Kentico installer. And you also get ASP.NET Core, which is a reimagining of ASP.NET for the 2020 era. If you want to look at it that way, it's taking ideas and paradigms from Node and Node.js and other frameworks and ecosystems, the way that MVC took influence from the Ruby on Rails framework when it was originally developed. So we have new, maybe more current modern ways of thinking about building our web applications with ASP.NET Core that just these approaches aren't going to be possible or ergonomic if we are taking that MVC5 route with Kentico 13.
Right. And the interesting thing is that with this great power and all these benefits comes some responsibility, if you will, if you want to use the sentence from the movie, but actually choices and abilities that are new with dilemmas for developers who are not familiar with .NET Core. So, when you click this button and you finish the install and you click next and you get your Kentico site running on Xperience, it actually opens up a Dancing Goat Core sample starter site. And the first thing you would want to do is maybe look at like the Startup CS or the Program CS. But if you're not even familiar with Startup CS as maybe a WebForms developer or a Portal Engine developer, Sean, what can we maybe like watch out for or tell people? Like, number one, I would encourage everyone to like go check out the documentation at Microsoft around a simple .NET Core starter site. There's great ways to get started at the Microsoft Learning areas of the documentation. Heck, even the documentation now at docs.microsoft.com has like, click here, spin up a new .NET Core site, and push it right to Azure and get it hosted and get off and running, or use the .NET Core CLI tool to say new project. You might want to get a basic understanding of the new framework stack, if you will, compared to the old full 4.8 framework, just to get like the basics involved of what does it mean to have a startup pipeline. And then from there, add in the Kentico layers. And maybe, Sean, you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a couple things to unpack here. One is when you use the Kentico Xperience installer and you're checking out this third beta and you choose .NET Core, you are going to get an ASP.NET Core project. Now it's going to be built out with all the standard Dancing Goat stuff, coffee and articles and features showing off Kentico Xperience as a platform. But one thing that will be significantly different compared to Portal Engine applications from previous years is that you will see much more ASP.NET code compared to Kentico code. So that's one big difference is when you were using a Kentico WebForms application, so much of that was Kentico. Yeah, it's all the standard ASPX and ASCX files. You'd see ASHX files and WCF code would be in there, and there's stuff all over the place. Right. It's a huge framework. It does a lot. But when you are doing this new model, when you get this sample project, you are going to see what looks like standard ASP.NET Core code with some types that Kentico is providing through libraries, which means that if you take the time to sit down and do a brand new vanilla ASP.NET Core project going through the documentation, you're not going to be that far off from what you get with the Kentico installer, which I think is a pretty cool thing, because that means if we see information, documentation, blogs out there on the web, and there is a lot these days around ASP.NET Core, if we see that information, that's going to be directly applicable to our Kentico Xperience applications every single time, because Kentico Xperience for the content delivery side of the application is just ASP.NET Core MVC. That's exactly what it is. So you won't be lost consulting Microsoft standard documentation, trying to understand this new framework, this new platform, everything around it, and then coming to a Kentico Dancing Goat sample application. You will see all the things that were in the docs, which is great. Right. On top of that, when you open up the application, typically in a portal engine or in an MVC5 application, the root of that application is either going to be some HTTP modules or handlers, or, if you're looking at your source code, it's going to be that global ASAX file.
Yep.
In ASP.NET Core, none of that stuff exists. The ideas behind what those did, those still exist. So there's still ways to interact with requests coming into the application and interact with responses going back out. But the center point of the application, there's two files, and they're at the root of the project. There's a program.cs, and that's the entry point, because in ASP.NET Core, the application is an exe that gets executed. Right. It's a program. So program.cs is that entry point to the application. There's not much in there. It's more of like a bootstrapping file.
Yeah, I mean, I'm showing it, and there's like 22, 23 lines of code total, and even in the Dancing Goat example. And actually, out of the box, it's probably only like a dozen lines of code. It's even smaller than that out of the box.
Yep, and you can trim it down a lot, too, if you go with a lot of the defaults. Mm-hmm. On top of that, there's a startup.cs file. And this is going to be it might be familiar to those of us that have done .NET framework development using Owen, which actually ASP.NET Core takes a lot of influence from. So using Web API and even the MVC5 Kentico 12 applications use startup.cs for doing stuff like authentication, managing and configuring that. Well, ASP.NET Core has a startup.cs file, except it's taken on a lot more responsibilities. And this is really the entry point for the application code, the business logic, the configuration. Everything is in here. Yeah. And in some ways, this file takes the role that webconfig did in a classic ASP.NET full framework application. So if you look at the big webconfig file that we get with a Kentico portal engine site, all that configuration of when things run and what's piped in and hooked into the application, all that stuff is going to be in the startup.cs file now. It's all in code and not in XML.
And actually, the way I like to think of it is the reason WebForms was like that with giant web configs is it had to interact with IIS. WebForms, full framework, ASP.NET, original 2.0 stuff, it relied fully on IIS. And you had to tell IIS how to handle requests, incoming and outgoing, you had to map handlers, you had to do all those things. And you needed a way to say in XML to IIS, hey, here's what this application is doing. And that set up a bunch of key things like what DLLs you might be dependent on, all sorts of fun things that you had to know as much about IIS as you did about programming to basically run a successful .NET site. My big takeaway for developers who aren't used to this is there is no IIS. There's nothing, you don't even need it. It runs in something called Kestrel on its own. Like Sean said, it's actually an executable, and that's why it's cross-platform. That's why you can run it in Linux or Windows, anywhere you want. But the role of that really is in startup.cs, and configuration is still available in .NET Core. You have user secrets. You have application settings.json. There's a Key Vault service in Azure that's really recommended, or other Key Vault services. So it's more about, here's what I want my application to do in Core, and I have to add every single thing. One of the big differences I've had to tell my team members is that think of it like a blank pipeline. A request comes in. If this class file is empty, literally nothing happens. It won't even respond with an HTTP code if you don't tell it to. And along the way, You have to add things in as a chain. You're going to add this in. You're going to add in authentication. You're going to add in routing. You're going to add in localization. All these things that you have to do to make a full-blown website in 2020, it's up to you. So that's what we're saying is, like, we started with a lot of benefits, but there's also, you have to take care and know how to do all this. Luckily, Kentico Xperience is showing how to do that. But you don't even have to do it this way if you don't want to. You can do it your own total way. And I know, Sean, you've got some great blog posts about that, right, on your blog?
Yeah, definitely. That I agree that is a huge difference between the mentality behind .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, and ASP.NET full framework. Either WebForms with Portal Engine or with MVC5 when doing Kentico 12 development. You get nothing by default and you opt into each thing you want is a very ASP.NET Core mentality. And that came from, like I mentioned previously, the Node.js world, where you could get a web server up and running in like 5 lines of code. That had a huge impact on developers' mindsets. They thought, this is amazing. Why do I need all this baggage that I get with, right, Java enterprise development, or at the time, .NET full framework development, where you get this giant web config, huge amount of XML. There's nested XML somewhere else on your machine, like in the application host config and machine config files.
Machine config, love that file.
Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah. That code is there. That's what that is. That XML is code, and it's telling IIS how to integrate with your app, how your app should run, how authentication works. All that stuff is there. So it's not like there's more code now. In fact, there's probably a little less. But less of it's hidden from us.
Right.
It's out there in our face, in our application. And I find that it's a bit clearer on what can be changed and what can be configured. Yeah. It's not so much of a don't touch this, leave it alone, unless you're an expert and you know absolutely what you're doing. Instead, it's taking the mindset of jump in. It might be a little scary, but jump in, fiddle around with this. Yeah. You're not going to ruin anything. You're the developer. Add the lines of code that you need. Consult the documentation when you need to, and run your app.
Well, and there's another huge point there. Not only is it configurable, those things, it's also testable now, right? We had this conversation as we were getting ready for the show today. One thing you hear a lot about Portal Engine developers with experience is, I know I need to write unit tests. I want to do more unit testing, but I'm not sure, because in Kentico Xperience Portal, it's like I just click configure and I do this. But testing is something that really works best in code, not configuration. When you're talking about a screen UI that the CMS tool is, compared to writing a unit test library. And .NET Core has some built-in unit testing that kind of works. That's one of the benefits of it. And it's now almost everything you do, even with the Kentico integration that's in there, is testable. And that's huge from a quality standpoint of the software development that you're doing as a developer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of testing. I wasn't always. For years, I didn't do any testing, and I kept reading about people recommending I do testing, and I decided, all right, I'm going to try this out. And yeah, once you get going on it, it becomes reassuring, for sure, preventing regressions and giving you that comfort of being able to change some code and knowing exactly what broke, instead of having to guess after you deploy or after you get into production, having our client figure out what broke. When you compare Portal Engine to ASP.NET Core, I don't know of any developers or teams that tested their transformations in a repeater.
Yeah, because
right?
You almost couldn't. It was so hard.
Yeah. And that means if you changed the name of a database column for like a page type or some custom module class, and you were using that in a repeater, good luck figuring out which repeater you were using. And you just had to run the site. You had to have you and your team and your QA people and the owner of the company and your clients and all of their employees go over the whole site, click on everything, try all the different conditions, and make sure nothing broke just by changing one database column.
Not even that technical. Hey, you have a repeater. It's got a path property, and it's a hard-coded path property value. And you know what? The marketing team decides to rename our products to just products, and suddenly your entire e-commerce store doesn't work anymore. Yeah, that's actually happened to me in the real world. I'm not even making that up, right?
Yep.
That is avoided with proper testing and proper automation of building with CI/CD and other even like Kentico CI with what Xperience can do. I mean, there's just better ways to do things now, and that's again one of the more advantages of moving to Core. So, actually, we could probably talk about this like all afternoon, Sean. But I want to kind of leave people with. There's a lot more coming with .NET Core. Right now, the third beta with Xperience is out. It supports Page Builder with widgets. There's a great starter example here in this Dancing Goat Core code base that we talked about a little bit. But Sean, if you could maybe list out 1 or 2, 3 things, maybe, not full details, but just if I'm a person who's in MVC5 today and I haven't done .NET Core, what are things that maybe are specific to Xperience that you may have to handle now that maybe MVC5 did for you, or even the portal engine did for you? Like, I'm thinking kind of like the basics of like routing. Routing is different because it's more up to you, but I know we've talked about a few others. Can you think of a couple like, hey, MVC5 developer, start learning about this because you have the ability to choose the architecture path that you're going to go down?
Yeah, definitely. So there's some enhancements that Kentico has made to the platform with Xperience 13. The one that I just blogged about is that I find really exciting is view components for widgets and sections. Previously, we were using child actions to handle custom code for those things, and now we get view components. I'm not going to dive into the details. It's in the blog post, but it's just a much more ergonomic approach and a lot more flexible and a lot more powerful. So that's just going to be something that makes our lives as developers a lot better. There's things like, routing. That's not in ASP.NET Core for the third beta, Kentico's automatic routing.
Almost made it from what we heard.
Yeah, it's not quite in there, but it's going to work very similar to how it does in MVC5 in the full framework version, which it is available for. So you can go and test that out if you want to test it out in a MVC5 application. That routing is going to be a game changer for lots of teams. We had to come up with our own solution. I've talked with other MVPs, and there's been blogs in the community, people talking about how they solve the dynamic routing problem for Kentico 12. Well, Kentico solved that problem for us in 13, and it's a very elegant solution and pretty powerful. They've added some really cool features, one of which we were talking about right before we started the call, is the ability to have a page in the document tree route directly to a view. So this just works out of the box, which means if you don't have custom code, let's say you need to get a site up fast for a client and they just want some content and they want to fill out content tree, and they want it to show up in the UI, and they want some pretty markup and CSS, and that's all you need to add. No custom business logic code. Then you can add a couple CSHTML files, put those views in your application, and as long as you are following the conventions in the documentation, Kentico will give you the page, the full document context for that view, strongly typed, with all the fields and everything you need to render out the information on that page in the MVC application. It's pretty awesome.
I think it's great. I mean, those are definitely things to work out for. I would tell people that, if you have to then show this to someone and get it hosted for a client, one of the other benefits of being on Core that you may not be aware as an MVC5 developer is if you're pushing things to Azure and you're using app services, you can actually deploy your consumption site, or your MVC Live site, as we've always called it, right to a Linux-based Azure app service and pay a fraction of the cost, even for app services that you used to pay for a full framework that had to be Windows-based app service. So we've done that a couple times already at Bitstream, and I'm really happy with how that's working, and I'm excited to pass cost savings on. So there's technical benefits, there's business benefits. We've talked about designers, how they could use a Mac to work on the front-end code. I mean, honestly, there's very little reason not to use .NET Core with Xperience 13. That is our main point I want you to take home with this podcast episode. So, with that, Sean, we've been going for a while, so we got to end it. I actually got a meeting I got to get to in a couple minutes, which is no big surprise to anyone. If people want to know more, where can they follow you at, Sean? Where can they find information about the blog post you mentioned?
Yeah, so they can follow me on Twitter. I'm pretty active posting about development things, Kentico Xperience things specifically. My handle is Sean G. Wright, SeanGWright. I have a blog on dev.to, which is a great community for blogging developers or people interested in programming and technical things. So check me out over there. Same handle. I blog almost exclusively about Kentico Xperience, Kentico 12 MVC, that type of stuff. And then also just check out Kentico on GitHub or the Kentico docs. And there's tons of great resources and information there.
Great. Thank you so much. You all know how to get a hold of me. I'll have these links that Sean mentioned in the show notes for the recording. And with that, this has been the Kentico Rocks podcast. So go enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
Thanks. See ya.
See ya.